Hey everybody. I wanted to come make this video to kind of talk about my spiritual deconstruction, I guess. This comes kind of inspired by Rhett and Link, who did theirs on their Ear Biscuits podcast, which I've never really consumed anything that they've done in the past, but my brother turned me on to that podcast. I thought it was really cool, and it felt inspiring, like something I needed to do for similar reasons. A lot of people that I know, friends of mine, people I grew up with, things like that, they don't really know where I stand on some of this stuff. And I kind of feel fraudulent. Like I have some people that think I believe the same things I used to believe when I knew them and hung out with them when I don't. And I thought that it was important to kind of get all that out. And also, my wife made a post recently. We grew up together in a church together. Made a post recently that kind of doing the same thing, and it just felt like the time to kind of do something like this. So I'm gonna give it a shot. I may make multiple videos, but just for some background, I was raised a Christian, um, indoctrinated at a young age, um, baptized when I was 13, grew up in youth group, and during probably grade school, elementary school, I started going to, actually, it was middle school. I started going to Christian camp up where I lived, where I grew up, um, in the summers. And then through high school, I started working there, and got to the point where after high school, I actually was a summer missionary there, raising um, funding to be able to be on staff, and um, also played in a lot of Christian bands, did some missionary work with my band in the Philippines. And if you hear me talk about the Philippines sometimes, that's what I'm talking about. And before I moved to Nashville, when I lived in California, I was a worship music pastor for a small church in the Eldorado Hills, California area. Um, So very involved my entire life in youth group and in church and all this stuff and discipleship and all these things. Very aware of most of the teachings of the church. I will say right off the bat, this is not an invitation for argument, for discussion, for trying to convince me. This is simply my journey, where it took me, how I got to where I am now, all the things that I found and learned. And if you find it useful, great. If you just want to know what happened to me, that's fine too. I'm sure that a lot of people will think that, well, I'll get to that later. But anyway, so um, when I lived in California, I worked for a company that was a recovery group home for teens, like drug and alcohol addiction recovery. It was basically a rehab, a live-in rehab for teenagers that were placed by the state. So they were actually um, detained in some sense. And when I worked there, my on shift partner, also named James, had gone from being a Protestant, he had converted to Catholicism, which I thought was strange because growing up as a Christian, as a, I should clarify, evangelical, um, Protestant evangelical Christian. I grew up non-denominational, Calvary Chapel, um, which is a denomination, even though they say they're non-denominational. When I was a kid, it was like a little kid, it was non-denominational. Um, it is, Calvary Chapel is a denomination now, I would say. And my wife's father was our first pastor at Calvary Chapel, Auburn, when I was a kid there. But anyway, um, so my I had always grown up hearing that Catholicism was so restrictive and so you know crazy and weird and all this stuff and out of touch with the Holy Spirit and all these things. So hearing somebody go from being a Protestant evangelical back to being, well, not back, but converting to Catholicism, um, I think historically, so I think of the Reformation anyway. Um, it was really strange to me. So I really spent a lot of time talking to my friend James, and he was raising a lot of questions and giving me stuff to read and stuff to listen to. And he gave me a catechism of the Catholic Church, and he gave me all these books, and um, we had constant conversation about it. And it was always interesting to me because it was kind of at a place where I felt like the church that I went to was very, I don't know, it felt like there was something missing. Um, so I started looking into Catholicism, and right around the same time, my other friend Andrew did the same thing. We grew up together, we were in bands together, we hung around together, went to church together. All of a sudden, Andrew went from being a Protestant to being a Catholic. I thought that was really interesting. So I started talking to Andrew about the same things because I was already, steeped in all this stuff from talking to James. And Andrew um, said something to me one time that I thought was brilliant. I don't know if he made this up himself. I'm pretty sure he didn't. I think he might have got it from G.K. Chesterton. I'm not sure exactly the origins of this. Maybe C.S. Lewis. I'm not sure. But he said you have to operate within the light that you're given. So, like, if you're holding a lamp in the darkness and you see a little circle around you, you have to operate as though that's all the information you have. But as you move down the road and the light illuminates more or the light gets brighter or whatever, and you see more around you or something comes to light, you have to operate as if that's the case with all the information that you have. That stuck with me from that point on, and I would say it's kind of the seeds of intellectual honesty, trying to be intellectually honest with myself. So that started sort of the journey. And then I moved to Tennessee in 2004 or 5. I think it was 2005. And when I got here, um, sorry for the camera moving. It is sitting on my chest and I am breathing, so it will move a little bit. Um, when I got here, I started looking into other churches and other things. Right before I left, I had really kind of realized that Catholicism wasn't for me because, like Pope John Paul said, if you disagree with any point of Catholic doctrine, then you're not a Catholic. So I, after much study, realized I'm not a Catholic. And so then also, I did a lot of digging into the Reformation and looking at different groups that came out of the Reformation, the Anglicans and the Lutherans, and started really looking into the different denominations and what they believed and where they came from, kind of looking for something, anything. I had a lot of doubts and a lot of questions, not just about the rituals around the worship of God, but about God and things. And I don't know, always felt like something was off. Um, so when I moved to Tennessee, I, went to some different churches and tried some different things and looked at some different stuff and read some different books and eventually just couldn't find what I was looking for, so I just kind of quit. Um, Stopped for a long time searching and just kind of lived my life. I was also going through some hard physical things and professional things and relational things, and so I just kind of stopped looking into it and just stayed where I was, kind of plateaued. Like, yeah, I believe in God. I believe that this is, basically, I believe I'm a Christian. Um, I believe what the Bible teaches, for lack of something better. Well, in 2012, I got the opportunity to go back to school, to go back to college. And um, I didn't really know, through different issues that I had, I didn't know that I was going to be good at it, or if I was going to enjoy it, or if I was going to be able to do it. I thought I was really stupid. Um, it's funny, like, writing composition actually kept me out of college for a lot of years because I was so scared of it. Turns out to be one of my favorite classes. Just all the English. I was actually the president of the English Honor Society and things like that. So that's just to say, don't psych yourself out about going to college. It's not as hard as you think it is. Well, I'm sure it is for some people, but I actually did really well. I enjoyed it. I stayed and I finished. I got my bachelor's degree in history with a minor in anthropology and archaeology, and I graduated with a summa cum laude with a 4.0. So it is possible, even if you don't think you can do it, you can. And there's lots of help out there and things like that. But anyway, that's kind of beside the point. Just a little bit of encouragement if anybody needed it. So when I went back to school, I had the unique opportunity to be able to choose classes that dealt with issues and questions and things that I had personally, as far as my faith went, as far as just my worldview went. Um, so I'm just going to kind of go through some of the classes and kind of connect the dots as to where I got to where I got to. So first I took biology and I got to learn about not just how things work on a cellular biological type level, but also more in depth about evolution, because I had always kind of avoided it, never really heard the whole story, always learned how to debunk it, or that it was all untrue, completely could not possibly be true, and here's why, and all this stuff. But I finally got the whole story on that, which is pretty eye-opening. And then got to take, for my sciences, I took biology and astronomy. And astronomy just because it had always fascinated me, but also I just wanted to know more about the universe and the size of the universe. And a lot of that just kind of seemed like just knowing it was hard to sort of. Anyway, I'll get back to that. But I also got to take like philosophy, critical thinking and reasoning, and that kind of taught me where our beliefs come from and what are rational and irrational beliefs and why beliefs are rational and irrational. The biggest thing, though, was my major and minor in history and anthropology. Um, I'll start with anthropology. Through archaeology, a lot of my archaeology classes, I learned about the archaeology of um, sort of the fossil record of human evolution. I learned how archaeology works, stratigraphy, all the different kinds of dating that you can do and how reliable they are, what you can know and learn through archaeology and all of that, as well as anthropology and all the different cultures of the world, and kind of finding out the different, every culture has their own religion, every culture has their own belief systems and taboos, but more so things like, this one was really hard for me to wrap my brain around as far as like a Christian worldview, is that every culture, every people around the world have um, homosexuals and transgenders, and the way that each society deals with those things is completely a cultural, societal thing. Um, some it's taboo, like it is in Christianity, and most, well, a good percentage of them it's not. Like the Native Americans, for instance, kind of revered two-spirit people as having two spirits of a man and a woman, and that they could have more power that way, where often holy people had the ability to live in as the opposite gender and marry, and same-sex marriages and things, and it was totally accepted. And for some reason, finding that out about all these different cultures around the world, and how every culture has had that, and how they deal with it is completely dependent on their culture, it almost made me sick, because I had already gotten to a point where I kind of had rejected those teachings of the church and was, you know, accepting of um, sexual orientation and gender orientation and things like that. But that just, I don't know, it just made me sick that I had been taught what I had been taught my whole life. It was in regards to that. Um,
I just wanted to jump in here. I was editing the video, looking at it, and going over it, and I realized this needed some clarification. My little boy's running around, so you're going to hear some noise. Basically, I was raised to believe that homosexuality was wrong, and that, you know, all the things that are typical of the Christian Protestant church. And so that's the basis, the context for what I said a minute ago. Basically, learning the reality of humanity, of the human species, and that homosexuality is a normal thing for uh, the species of humans. That is something that happens somehow. It's common. It's been common throughout our entire evolutionary history, and the idea of not being accepting of that, and the idea of punishing that in uh, through history, the idea of the stigmas and the cultural garbage and all the stuff that the gay rights, the LBGT community had to fight for to get that respect back and to get that their rights back. It makes me sick to have been part of the religious body that created all of that shit. So that's really what I mean when I say learning that information made me sick. It made me sick that the church taught what they taught. It made me sick that they had um, hindered a group of people uh, and taken rights from people. That's that's a little clarification about that. So anyway, I just wanted to jump in and say that.
some of the bigger um, epiphanies as far as Christianity go is I actually got to take classes like the history of Israel, the history of Christianity, um, what was it, science, what is it? It was science, religion, and magic. That's what it was. And that just dealt with the history, the archaeology, the story behind Israel, behind Christianity, behind Jesus, behind the whole story archaeologically, historically. Um, I went deep. I read a lot of books. I still have them. Um, Basically, it's changed the way that I see this whole picture. It's kind of a brief look into it. Um, I'll start here. The Old Testament. Um, in the ancient Israel in the ancient kingdoms that make up Israel. The northern part of the kingdom, Judah, was worshipped in historically before biblical times and even during biblical times, worshipped a god named El, who was different than Yahweh from the south. Very similar. Both were originally represented by a bull. Um, they had similar traits and powers, but they were considered very different. When Moses goes up on the mountain and comes down and they're worshiping a bull statue after he gets the Ten Commandments, that bull statue represented El, not Yahweh. But as you read the Old Testament, you see that God is often referred to as El, Elyon, Elohim. um, El Shaddai. All of these are variations of the name El, which is representative of the god El, representative. Basically, there's this thing that I came to understand called syncretism. Syncretism is when two religions or two beliefs or two ideas kind of meld together and become one. It's usually regional. Like, you go down, you're in a different country, you go to the temple because you want to worship your God, thank him for your safe travels or whatever. You go in there and you say, who is this a temple to? And they say, oh, this is a temple to George. You go, oh, who is George? And they say, oh, George is the god of the sky and the sea. He rides a chariot and he has a spear. And he's very, god of war, and he's our primary deity. And he goes, oh, well, back where I come from, we've got Paul is our god. Paul is also the god of the sea. He also rides a chariot, and he's also the premier god of our area. So it must be the same god. So, and then over time, those beliefs kind of become combined, and then you end up worshiping John Paul or George Paul or whatever it was, Paul George. Um, that's kind of the basic, really uh, rudimentary explanation of syncretism. But one of the books I read, which I have right here, Who Wrote the Bible by Richard Elliott Friedman. If you want to look into this, it's backwards on there, but if you want to look into this, this is a good book. Basically, it covers the idea or the sort of the history and archaeological and record, not so much archaeological, but basically by dissecting the Old Testament, you can see that there was 4 different manuscripts written, and they were all put together to make what we have as the Old Testament, which is why the narrative will switch from El to Yahweh and back and forth, and why certain stories are told multiple times, and things like this, to just show that basically it was like one group, it was priests from the north, one group was priests from the south. They both had their own agendas, which come through in the different versions that they wrote, or the different, parts that were combined to make. So with one group, you can see certain things that they were trying to push, and the other group, you can see other things that they were trying to push, and it gives this very much a view of, to me, oh, this didn't come straight from God. This has been totally corrupted by man from the very beginning. From not even talking about, the Council of Trent and the canon of the Scripture and any of this stuff. Like, back, the Old Testament was basically cut and pasted between 2 different complete belief systems and made to show biases and all kinds of things. So that was fascinating. Learning that El and Yahweh were uh, combined through syncretism was fascinating. Learning that, then I moved on to Jesus and the view of Jesus historically to find that I straight up asked one of my professors who I really trusted and who was very knowledgeable in all this stuff, uh, what is really honestly known about Jesus? And he said, "What do you mean if he actually existed?" I was like, well, yeah. He goes, "Actually, I do think he existed, but," and then we went on it. I took a class about it too with the same professor. And basically, the idea is a lot of the stuff that was attributed to Jesus was attributed after he was gone. Um, not to say that he didn't live, not to say that he wasn't an amazing teacher and had great things to say and teach and give, but really, there's no, uh, well, obviously, there's no way of knowing and no historical record of the things that are attributed to him, but really, it's kind of clear through a lot of things that a lot of the stuff was just attributed to him at a later date. And one of the major things that starts out the story is when you look at um, the story of Jesus, born of a virgin, um, you know, died, rose on the third day. A lot of these things can be easily attributed to the sun. On the 25th of December, or the 21st, technically, the sun is at its lowest part in the sky. It stays there for 3 days before it's in the northern hemisphere, before it starts moving back north again. The days get longer, and um, it's the whole dying and raising again thing. And then also, a lot of the things that are attributed to Christ are also attributed to, like, Horus from Egypt, Attis from Greece, Mithra, Krishna, Dionysus. There's a bunch of um, these stories that are copies, born of a virgin, died and rose again. All these things that a lot of can be attributed to the sun. A lot of it can be attributed to just the syncretism again. Oh, here's a story that we need to recycle. That's easy. They're sort of like, you can think of it like tropes that our brains can easily wrap around. Our brains can easily digest, and we've heard it before. So it's like, oh yeah, 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 I get it. And so it's like, let's make him born of a virgin. You know, all these things. Start ministry at a certain age, and you know, all these things. Die, raise again. Um, so you start getting this picture of Jesus that, like, oh, Jesus was a great guy. He was lived. He was a teacher. He was revolutionary for his time. But then when he leaves and there's a vacuum, then the stories start to get a little more intense and things are starting to be added. And then you start thinking about things like the Apostle Paul, who the vast majority of the New Testament was written by Paul. So you start wondering, what did Paul know? What did he do? Was he doing things on purpose to kind of start a cult and grab some power and create a doctrine that he could then be in charge of? Or is he completely innocent and really believes in this? Or is he getting it from somebody else, some other source, like the disciples, the apostles? There's no way really to know. But then once this kind of seed starts and starts to grow, and it's the counterculture, and then it gets bigger and bigger, and you start dealing with, you know, um, it becoming the Catholic Church. And then once that happens, the power grabbing and the wealth collecting and the corruption just goes through the roof. And that was the sole arbiter, the sole preserver of this religion for a very, very long time. So, coming out the other end, even after the Protestant Reformation, it's just such a convoluted and perverted message and idea, and the whole thing is a suspect to begin with. So, anyway, that's just where I got to in my time. My major conclusion at the end is looking at, astronomy and biology and science, and which anthropology and archaeology are very much tied to science as well, um, especially archaeology. And it's kind of like if in the modern world, science informs our view of the universe, and science has set up the scientific method. And not a lot of people need to hear this, but some people really need to hear this. Scientific method is set up so that you come up with a hypothesis and then you test it. And if your test comes out to show that your hypothesis may be correct, then you put that information out there, and then other scientists try as hard as they can to reproduce it or to debunk your hypothesis. And after a certain amount of people are successful in reproducing it a certain amount of times, then we go, okay, this is kind of adding to our knowledge base. It becomes a theory. And certain theories hold a lot of weight because they are consistently accurate. They can be consistently reconstructed and recreated. And the act of trying to disprove each other is how we weed out the things that are not accurate, and how we keep everything above board and accurate. Um, so as that process continues, and what our view of the universe is developed around what we know of the universe through science, as that changes and the ideas change and the theories change and something comes along and disproves something that's been the best theory up until this point, and we know more, then our view of the universe shifts a little bit and takes into account what is new and what we learned. And very much religion is not that way. We fight. I say we, I don't belong to a religion at this point, but Christians, I will speak as a Christian because that's what I know, but Christians fight science. They fight the information. They want to not hear it because they don't want to disprove what they believe. Um, if God created the universe, as you say, finding this information, learning more scientific stuff of the universe that He created, using science to understand more about the universe that God created, would therefore shed more light on who God is. So why wouldn't you want to incorporate that into your view of who God is? But religion doesn't update based on science. It doesn't look at what we know of science and go, oh, okay, well then, we need to update our operating system. It doesn't do that. It doubles down and says, nope, 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 I'm not going to believe it. I'm not going to. And science is set up, as I said, to weed out the stuff that is inaccurate. And so if this stuff is scientifically accurate, it's a theory that's been tested and been reproduced and been consistent and been accurate and been reliable, then why would I assume that a book that was pieced together by a pastoral nomadic people from the Levant 2,000 years ago plus somehow got it all right, got every aspect of God, the universe, and everything into one book completely accurately 2,000 years ago and does not need any updating, any questioning, anything. It's perfect. It just doesn't make sense that that would be the case. That 2,000 years ago, somehow magically these people got it absolutely right. And even if it goes against everything we know of science and everything we've looked at and everything we've learned, and has become obvious that it is the case, how, it doesn't hold water for me anymore. So, and I have through archaeology learned of, the fossils of the human. I talked about that. And human fossils and the evolutionary record and how the dating works and how reliable it is and where the fossils came from, and you know all the way up through physics and science, astronomy and cosmology. And it's just not, I can't take into light all of that information and reject it outright because of some book that was written 2,000 years ago that I was indoctrinated into at a young age. So anyway, that's my first video. Maybe I'm gonna have to split this into multiple ones. I don't know, but so as of today, I am no longer a Christian. Uh, it's not to say that I'm not spiritual. I just have a very different view of what being spiritual means and what it is, and there's very few churches for things that I believe, and I kind of feel like church is great for community, but I don't know that it's necessary for a lot of other things. So I don't really go to church, but I definitely have some spiritual beliefs, which I may get into in another video after this. But yeah, so I know a lot of people will think, oh, he went to college, that was his biggest mistake. But again, that's that fear of college. A lot of Christians kind of resist people going to college, and they tell people not to go to secular colleges because they'll try to disprove your faith. Well, there's kind of a correlation there that's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. It's like, yeah, you can avoid college for fear that it's going to disprove your religion, or you can see that when people go to college, they learn truth and real things, and those real things call into question the religion, not the other way around. So it's kind of like, yeah, I went to college and yeah, I came out not a Christian, but I also really took specific classes that answered questions that I had and, made my own conclusions. It wasn't because I went to college. And a lot of people also will dismiss me as, there's a lot of dismissive things with Christians. I know because I used to do it where it's like, oh, you're fallen away, or you know, once saved, always saved, you'll be back, or like, oh, come back to the faith, or I'll be praying for you, or this makes me so sad that, I mean, they're very dismissive things to say, and I won't be back. Um, I don't believe in Yahweh. I don't believe in Jesus being divine. So it makes it really hard for me to. I'm the kind of person that once I know something, I can't unknow it. I can't just decide to ignore it and trot off down the path, skipping happy go lucky as though I don't know something. Once I know it, it's there. It's that intellectual honesty I spoke about earlier. And I am literally operating within the light that I am given. This is the light that I am given. I sought it out. Once I knew it, I couldn't unknow it. And being intellectually honest with myself means not pretending I don't know it. So that's where I am. If you watched to this point, thanks for watching. And